What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be talking about some draft strategy for your redraft fantasy football leagues. Today, we're going to be focusing on those middle picks. If you are picking from that 5, 6, 7, or 8 spot in your drafts, we've already done a video on the early picks, the 1 through 4 picks of those drafts. So if you have one of those selections, we already have a video on the channel for that one. But today, we'll talk through the best strategy that I have found for these middle round picks, hopefully helping you guys win a fantasy football championship here in 2025. And I'll show you guys some mock drafts and some real drafts that I've done against some people in our Discord, just walking you through the strategy and showing you how I've implemented this in those drafts. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about this draft strategy. All right, so as you can see, I do have this strategy breakdown up on the screen, and this is kind of a rough outline that you guys can follow if you are drafting from those middle picks. I will tell you right now, those light blue rounds, rounds 2 and round 6 are wildcard rounds. We kind of have to adapt our strategy based off of what you do earlier in the draft. So those are highlighted for a reason. I'll walk you through that really, but what I have found works the best for me at this point in time with the ADPs that I am seeing over on Sleeper. If you're drafting on Sleeper, these are going to be very tailored to you. But taking that elite wide receiver 1 in round 1 has been the advantage that I have found. So it is going to be tough. Sometimes you're going to have Jahmyr Gibbs available. Sometimes you're going to have Saquon available, or maybe you even have a guy like Bijan. More likely than not, Bijan and Saquon will be gone, but you are going to have to pass on guys like Jahmyr Gibbs to grab a wide receiver 1. And that's going to feel hard, but I think that the value that you have later in the drafts at the running back position, specifically in round 2 and round 3, are where you're going to make your money back by passing on Gibbs in the first. Plus, we know running backs are just a little bit more fragile as fantasy football assets than the wide receivers. So getting the elite wide receiver 1, the hit rates are just a little bit better, and that's why I've been targeting them here in round 1. Now, round 2, I have it listed as a wild card round. It's running backs or wide receiver, really the best player available. I do want to target the running back first if there's still an elite guy on the board. Guys that I would be looking at in that range would be Achane, Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Christian McCaffrey. There's a few running backs that I think you can get your hands on in round 2. Those would be the guys that I'm looking at. Now, I do have it as best player available because if there are players like AJ Brown or Drake London, they might be a better player available depending on the running backs that are currently on the board. So that's why I have it as a wild card round. Now, if you do select the running back in round 2, round 6, I'm going to go with the wide receiver. Now, if you select the wide receiver in round 2, round 6 is where I'm going to lean for the running back. So that's kind of the wild card. Basically, you're swapping the selection. Whichever one you take in round 2, you'll take the opposite in round 6, and that's why those are highlighted. So hopefully that makes sense. Round 3, I think there's just a good running back value in that round. Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, James Cook, all great options for your running back too. I do like rounds 4 through 5 being best player available, obviously, but mainly focusing on the wide receiver position. I like to try and get 4 wide receivers through the first 6 rounds of my drafts. I feel like that gives me the best depth and it gives me the best upside on my lineup. So 4 wide receivers through 6 is really the goal for me. We kind of already touched on round 6. You're just doing the opposite of what you did in round 2. Also, just focus on best player available. If there's not any good running backs and you already took, a wide receiver in round 2, do what you got to do. That's why BPA is there. And I do kind of just want to put a caveat. I know I've said best player available a few times. Be fluid. Focus on the board. If there is clearly a tier difference between a running back and a wide receiver, don't pin yourself into drafting a wide receiver just because it's on the sheet. This is more a loose guideline, instructions you can follow to try and get a good build with roster construction, but don't force yourself to do something if it's clearly not the best player for your team. Do not pass on T. Higgins to draft Isaiah Pacheco. That's not what you're going to do here. So round 7, I do like to focus on grabbing my running back 3. In rounds 8 through 10, that's where I want to grab a quarterback, a tight end, and then one more player, wide receiver or running back. It's up to you, really best player available there, but make sure you get your quarterback and your tight end in that round 8 through 10 range. And then rounds 11 and 12, the last 2 rounds of those drafts, focus on upside. Get some young guys, maybe some guys that have, some ambiguous backfields, things like that can find roles. Shoot for the upsides. Those players realistically might be players you are dropping, very early on into the season, 1 or 2 weeks into the season, once the waiver wire starts to kind of pop off. So make sure those are just upside picks. You want to see if you can get upside right away. If you can't, you can cut them to move on and grab guys off the waivers. So that is kind of the rough outline of the strategy. Like I said, rounds 2 and 6 are wild cards, but I'll show you guys how we implement those in some drafts here in just a second, because I did take a mock draft against the computer from every single one of these draft slots. So 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then I did 2 real drafts against some people from the Discord. So let's just hop into the first one here. Looking at this first mock draft, this is the one from the 5 slot. So I ended up going with CeeDee Lamb as my elite wide receiver off the top of the draft. I have him over Justin Jefferson right now, but him, Amon-Ra, CeeDee, all of those guys would be guys in consideration for me in these middle picks. Even a guy like Puka Nacua potentially in play here as well. But then I went down into that second round. Like I said, I like to go with the running back prioritized over the wide receiver. Obviously, we were focusing best player available. As you can see, London, AJ Brown, those guys come off the board. So Josh Jacobs was the best player available for me. It was really between him and Jonathan Taylor. I just leaned Jacobs. I don't really have a strong player take between either of the two guys. I think Jacobs is in the better offense. That's why I leaned for him. Now, in that round 3, obviously, like I said, I'd like to grab the running back. Chase Brown was available. I had in consideration Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, James Cook, but Chase Brown was my selection. Back into that round 4 through 6, where I was looking at the wide receivers. You see, I added DJ Moore, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Addison. Now, Jordan Addison might have a suspension here, so obviously, if this was a real draft, you might take the risk into consideration a little bit more, but also if you were doing this a little bit closer towards season, you can make an audible and pick somebody else there. Maybe you take Calvin Ridley instead. So that's what I ended up doing. My RB3 in round 7 is what I like to do. Tony Pollard was the selection. And like I said earlier, 4 wide receivers through 6 is usually what I like to get there as a plan. And you see we accomplished that here with that. Rounds 8 through 10. This is really where it was the quarterback, tight end, and best player available. We just played the board. Mark Andrews was the tight end that fell to us there with the 8th round pick. Josh Downs was the best player available selection there in the 9th round. And I took Dak Prescott in round 10 to stack with CeeDee Lamb, who he selected there at 5. And then the final 2 rounds, that's where I went upside. J.K. Dobbins could see some touches early on. And Rashad Bateman, obviously the wide receiver 2 in his offense. That is a very good offense in the NFL. If I have to cut those 2 guys later on, I do. But at the end of the day, they were my upside picks, so to speak, just to get some extra production on the roster. So this is kind of how it landed for the first time. Worked out really well, just basically cookie cutter to that draft strategy that I showed you earlier. Landing the 4 wide receivers through the 6 rounds, that running back 3 in round 7, the tight ends, the quarterbacks, all of that good stuff. That's how that worked out here from the 105. So let's see what it looks like when you're drafting from the 6th slot, or how we can keep the strategy going from here. Obviously, Lamb came off the board early. Amon-Ra went ahead of Jefferson, so I took Jefferson here at the 106. He was the elite wide receiver 1. Then again, I was able to prioritize the running backs in rounds 2 and 3. We got Bucky Irving to fall to us at the 2-7, and I grabbed Breece Hall at the 306. So those were my 2 running back selections, which meant we were going to hammer the wide receiver position again through the next couple of rounds, focusing on trying to get 4 wide receivers through the first 6 rounds. We accomplished that by getting Mike Evans, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle. In round 7, we got our RB3, who was Isaiah Pacheco. He fell a little bit, further than where he normally falls, but at the end of the day, we were able to grab him. We still, if he would have gone, could have had guys like Tony Pollard, Caleb Johnson, Brian Robinson Jr. All of those guys would have been in play. Round 8, we went with our tight end. I went Evan Engram for the Denver Broncos. Best player available selection in round 9 was Ricky Pearsall, and Dak Prescott again was my selection at quarterback in round 10. Just think he's a great value where he's at in drafts, and think he has top 12 potential in fantasy. For our 2 upside selections in rounds 11 and 12, I went with Tajay Spears and JJ McCarthy. Now, I typically wouldn't draft 2 quarterbacks, but we did have some guys that I do like drafting, like Bigsby, Jaden Blue, Luther Burden. Some of those guys came off the board, and so I said, hey, we have Justin Jefferson on the team. Why not just take JJ McCarthy and see what happens, get that stack? Obviously, Kevin O'Connell has been very good with the quarterbacks, and he was our upside selection. So that's kind of how this has worked from that 106 slot. So again, very similar strategy. We just followed the blueprint, and it got us a very similar team that actually I think I like this team just a tiny bit more. Moving on to the 107. This is where we got to try it again. Elite wide receiver for us was CeeDee Lamb. He fell a little bit because Nacua went ahead of him. Obviously, we could have went Amon-Ra St. Brown if Lamb wasn't there, but we ended up going with CeeDee Lamb again. Bucky Irving and Breece Hall, the 2 running backs that we got again here based off of Sleeper's ADP, we were able to land both of those guys. So we got the running backs in rounds 2 and 3. Rounds 4, 5, and 6. 4 wide receivers through the first 6 rounds. We got Devontae Adams, Xavier Worthy, and Tet McMillan. RB3 in round 7 with Caleb Johnson. We could have, had gotten locked out of this one a little bit. I was looking at this draft specifically, and we had Pollard come off at the 7-2. Brian Robinson come off at the 7-4. DeAndre Swift at the 7-5. Caleb Johnson was really the last guy I was super comfortable with. So if, Caleb Johnson would have went ahead of where he went in this draft for us, I might have looked at Rome Odunze. I might have looked at a wide receiver here, just focusing on the best player available and not, kind of dialed myself into the RB3. But Caleb Johnson was the last in the tier for me, so we're lucky that we got him, but I would have looked somewhere else had he went ahead of that. Mark Andrews was the tight end for us. Josh Downs was the best player available selection, and Dak Prescott again, 8, 9, and 10. Our upside shots, Tajay Spears and Luther Burden. So you're seeing a very similar strategy here that we've used from the 5, the 6, and the 7. But let's move on to the 8th overall slot here just to see how it works for all of those middle round picks. Obviously, Chase, Jefferson, and Lamb, they all came off the board, so we selected Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 8th spot as the elite wide receiver 1. The good thing is, because we were a little bit further back, we had better shots at some running backs. We did have Christian McCaffrey fall, so we took Christian McCaffrey at the 2-5. Breece Hall was our 3-8 selection, so the 2 running backs there again in rounds 2 and 3. Focusing on 4 wide receivers through 6. The next 3 rounds we went wide receiver heavy. Mike Evans, Xavier Worthy, and Jalen Waddle were the selections. RB3 in round 7. Tony Pollard was our selection. Round 8 through 10, quarterback, tight end, and best player available. We landed Kyler Murray in the 8th round, Jaden Reed in the 9th round, and Tucker Kraft in the 10th round. Our upside selections, Tank Bigsby and Drake May. Again, don't love taking 2 quarterbacks, but Drake May felt like he had a ton of rushing upside, and I'd rather shoot on him at this point in time and maybe use him as trade bait after a week or 2 in those leagues. But at the end of the day, he was the upside selection that we made along with Tank Bigsby, and that was really the team overall. So you may be looking at this and thinking to yourself, yeah, Andrew, this works against the computer when you're using Sleeper's ADP and maybe Sleeper's drafting by ADP, and you know that's great, but I want to see you do this against real people. We did this against real people in 2 separate drafts. This draft is the first of the real people that we drafted against. These are all people from our Discord, so if you want to draft against us in the future, make sure you go join our Discord. But this is real people, not, you know, computers, and we're drafting from the 107, trying to follow a similar strategy. Jamar Chase off the board, CeeDee Lamb off the board, Justin Jefferson off the board, even Malik Neighbors went ahead. We still landed Amon-Ra St. Brown as our elite wide receiver 1. The next 2 selections, Bucky Irving as our running back 1 in the 2nd round, James Cook is our running back 2 in the 3rd round. Going on, 4 wide receivers through 6. The next 3 rounds, Terry McLaurin, Xavier Worthy, and Jordan Addison were the selections. We were able to land our running back 3, a better running back 3 than expected because wide receivers kind of got pushed up the board. There in the 7th round, we got Aaron Jones. In the 8th round, I go with my quarterback, Kyler Murray. 9th round, Evan Engram. And 10th round, best player available to me was Najee Harris. He was falling. A risky selection. If you have to cut him at the end of the day, you have to cut him, but he's was best player available to me on my board. But that's kind of just, you know, looking at how this has worked from our template. Rounds 8 through 10, quarterback, tight end, best player available. And then, you know, what we saw early on, the elite wide receivers, the 2 running backs, and the 4 wide receivers through 6. It's working here against real people. Also, the upside selections, we took Dylan Sampson in the 11th round and Trey Harris in the 12th round as well. So that's kind of how this worked in the first one. But remember earlier on, I said pay attention, stay fluid to the draft board, and make sure that you're not like pinning yourself into a strategy specifically, because we do have some wild card rounds in the 2nd round and in the 6th round of our draft. I'm going to show you a real draft here against real people that I had to get a little bit creative. I had to stay fluid. I had to be flexible. And so looking at this real draft here where we were drafting from the 8th slot, let's walk you through it. Round 1, the elite wide receiver 1. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the selection. Kind of, you know, Chase, Lamb, Jefferson, Neighbors, same group of guys. We got Amon-Ra St. Brown. In the 2nd round, unfortunately, we had Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, and Bucky Irving all come off of the board. We were drafting a little bit earlier in the 2nd round, so we didn't have, you know, the CMCs, the Buckys, the Achanes, any of them fall. We're looking at the best player available in this round for me being A.J. Brown. I wasn't going to pass on A.J. Brown just to reach down and grab a Josh Jacobs. That's a tier break for me. So I'm going to grab A.J. Brown. Like I said, that round 2 is a wild card round, but that just meant that we were going to keep focusing 4 wide receivers through 6, get our running back 2, do all of that good stuff, and I'll show you how I adapted to that. So round 3, we were going to go the running back anyways, no matter what. We go Kyron Williams. He's there for us. Great. Best player available in round 4, we took Breece Hall. We're trying to focus on 4 wide receivers through 6. As you remember in some of the earlier drafts, 4, 5, and 6 is really where we were pounding the wide receiver position because we ended up getting the 2 running backs in rounds 2 and 3. Well, because we didn't, round 3 was our first running back, round 4 was our second running back. Now it's back to business, 4 wide receivers through 6. Rounds 5, we get Xavier Worthy and Jalen Waddle in round 6. So you see how I adapted that? I didn't necessarily pin myself into that one strategy. We had that wild card round in round 2, like I mentioned, but we still kind of got back on track with 4 wide receivers through 6. We have our 2 running backs. We just took them instead of 2-3, we took them at 3-4, taking what the board gave us. But now on round 7, we're right back to business. RB3 is really the plan that we were trying to get to. RB3 in round 7, we go Brian Robinson Jr. Rounds 8 through 10, that's when we're looking at the quarterback, the tight end, and the best player available. we still accomplished that. So we're really right back to following that blueprint that I've given you, for that draft strategy. Mahomes was the 8th round pick. Jordan Mason was the best player available in the 9th. He's the selection, and Tucker Kraft is our 10th round pick. For the 2 upside selections, rounds 11 and 12, Najee Harris and Rashad Bateman. Like I said with Najee, you got to cut him, fine, but he was the best player available to me, and Bateman in a good offense. So, we had to adapt this draft strategy and be flexible because of what the board gave us, but we didn't get too far away from the strategy. We still came away with a similar team in similar roster construction, still accomplished 4 wide receivers through 6, our quarterback and our tight ends, rounds 8 through 10, the upside selections late. We just took the running backs a little bit different because of what the board kind of showed us early on in the draft. And we had those running backs get pushed up in the 2nd and in the 1st round. So that's kind of how I would go about that. And like I said, avoiding getting pinned into a strategy, because I could have reached down and grabbed Jacobs, but why would I pass on AJ Brown, who I think is a better player, to grab Jacobs if I can just take what the board gives me and still follow this strategy loosely to get a very good team in roster construction and overall upside. So that's kind of how we did it in that real draft, where we had to get a little bit creative. So that's kind of the strategy for me that I felt like has worked, going the elite wide receiver 1, obviously the 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers through 6, the RB3 in round 7 where we have that sweet spot of guys, and then obviously the quarterbacks, tight ends, and the upside selections. That's what's worked for me. Hopefully you guys see this and you get inspiration for your own strategy, and or you like this strategy and want to try it out in your leagues, hopefully getting some good fantasy football teams, and then hopefully winning a championship here in 2025. Like I said at the beginning of this video, we did the early picks strategy video last week, I think was last week, so it's on the channel already. Picks 1 through 4 is what we focused on. Kind of a similar strategy. It got adapted a little bit further here in the middle rounds just to give us a little bit more flexibility with some of the ADPs, but I strongly encourage going and checking out that video if you have an early pick in your fantasy drafts this year. And if you like this content, you found something informative, actionable, educational, entertaining, any of those things, you just like the content, you want to support the channel, hit the like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. That way you don't miss any future content. We are doing the late picks of that round, so 9, 10, 11, 12 later this week. If you're drafting from there, that video will be out here in the next couple of days, so make sure you're subscribed like I said, and go join the free Discord if you want to draft with us in the future. Like I said, free to join, so no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I'll see you on our next episode. Until then, peace out.